Hello there. In this video, I'm reading Twilight Breaking Dawn with relaxing rain sounds in the background to help you get down to sleep. This is part 2. Thank you so much for all of the support and the lovely comments and likes on the first part to this series. And of course, please do like and subscribe for the rest of this book. I'm Mad Morph, and this is my podcast called Down to Sleep, where I read books to you for free. I've got 2 channels on YouTube, and this one, Down to Sleep Extra, has pretty much become the Twilight channel because YouTube took other videos down for now. But if you want to hear me read other books, you can check out the main channel or listen on Spotify and everywhere you get podcasts. I'm always open to suggestions, so let me know what other books you'd like to hear in a comment. And if you'd like to join my community, you can come and join me on Patreon at patreon.com/downtosleep. That is the place to hear everything first, and it means you skip the wait here on YouTube and can hear all of Breaking Dawn from start to finish right now. We'll be starting Midnight Sun up there soon with weekly episodes for you to enjoy, and you can also get a Vampire Boyfriend roleplay from me in the Patreon shop. So if you want me to tuck you in and help you sleep, check out downtosleeppodcast.com for all the links. This is my first time reading this book series. I recorded myself reading it for the first time, and I had never seen the movies, so to reward myself after finishing them all, I just watched the first film in the saga, and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to be watching New Moon next, and just really getting into the Hoa 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 season this autumn. Going to be watching the full saga for the first time, and thinking of doing a video where I talk about it, because on the last video people said they missed me analysing it and talking about the characters. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. It'll probably be over on Mad Morph Movie Club, which is my channel where I talk about movies. I'll put all the links that you need in the description, but I'm hoping to find the time to do that, because I actually really enjoyed the first one. I feel like people who say they don't like it might be lying, but as someone who read the books, I thought it was great. Anyway, that's what's been going on with me. I hope you've had a wonderful start to October and are enjoying this fall. Let's go ahead and tuck you in. Take a nice deep breath for me. And let's get down to sleep. Houston? I asked, raising my eyebrows when we reached the gate in Seattle. Just a stop along the way, Edward assured me with a grin. It felt like I'd barely fallen asleep when he woke me. I was groggy as he pulled me through the terminals, struggling to remember how to open my eyes after every blink. It took me a few minutes to catch up with what was going on when we stopped at the international counter to check in for our next flight. Rio de Janeiro? I asked, with slightly more trepidation. Another stop, he told me. The flight to South America was long, but comfortable, in the wide first-class seat, with Edward's arms cradled around me. I slept myself out and awoke unusually alert as we circled toward the airport with the light of the setting sun slanting through the plane's windows. We didn't stay in the airport to connect with another flight as I'd expected. Instead, we took a taxi through the dark, teeming, living streets of Rio. Unable to understand a word of Edward's Portuguese instructions to the driver, I guessed we were off to find a hotel before the next leg of our journey. A sharp twinge of something very close to stage fright twisted in the pit of my stomach as I considered that. The taxi continued through the swarming crowds until they thinned somewhat, and we appeared to be nearing the extreme western edge of the city, heading into the ocean. We stopped at the docks. Edward led the way down the long line of white yachts moored in the night-blackened water. The boat he stopped at was smaller than the others, sleeker, obviously built for speed instead of space. Still luxurious, though, and more graceful than the rest. He leapt in lightly, despite the heavy bags that he carried. He dropped those on the deck and turned to help me carefully over the edge. I watched in silence while he prepared the boat for departure, surprised at how skilled and comfortable he seemed because he'd never mentioned an interest in boating before. But then again, he was good at just about everything. As we headed due east into the open ocean, I reviewed basic geography in my head. As far as I could remember, there wasn't much east of Brazil, until you got to Africa. But Edward sped forward while the lights of Rio faded, and ultimately disappeared behind us. On his face was a familiar, exhilarated smile, the one produced by any form of speed. The boat plunged through the waves and I was showered with sea spray. Finally, the curiosity I'd suppressed so long got the best of me. "Are we going much farther?" I asked. It wasn't like him to forget that I was human, but I wondered if he planned for us to live on this small craft for any length of time. About another half hour. His eyes took in my hands, clenched on the seat, and he grinned. Oh well, I thought to myself. He was a vampire, after all. Maybe we were going to Atlantis. 20 minutes later, he called my name over the roar of the engine. "Bella, look there." He pointed straight ahead. I saw only blackness at first, and the moon's white trail across the water. But I searched the space where he pointed until I found a low black shape breaking into the sheen of moonlight on the waves. As I squinted into the darkness, the silhouette became more detailed. The shape grew into a squat, irregular triangle, with one side trailing longer than the other before sinking into the waves. We drew closer, and I could see the outline was feathery, swaying to the light breeze. And then my eyes refocused, and the pieces all made sense. A small island rose out of the water ahead of us, waving with palm fronds, a beach glowing pale in the light of the moon. "Where are we?" I murmured in wonder while we shifted course, heading around to the north end of the island. He heard me despite the noise of the engine, and smiled a wide smile that gleamed in the moonlight. "This is Isle Esme." The boat slowed dramatically, drawing with precision into position against a short dock constructed of wooden planks, bleached into whiteness by the moon. The engine cut off, and the silence that followed was profound. There was nothing but the waves, slapping lightly against the boat, and the rustle of the breeze in the palms. The air was warm, moist, and fragrant, like the steam left behind after a hot shower. "Isle Esme." My voice was low, but it still sounded too loud as it broke into the quiet night. "A gift from Carlisle. Esme offered to let us borrow it." A gift? Who gives an island as a gift? I frowned. I hadn't realized that Edward's extreme generosity was a learned behavior. He placed the suitcases on the dock and then turned back, smiling his perfect smile as he reached for me. Instead of taking my hand, he pulled me right up into his arms. "Aren't you supposed to wait for the threshold?" I asked, breathless, as he sprung lightly out of the boat. He grinned. "I'm nothing if not thorough." Gripping the handles of both huge steamer trunks in one hand and cradling me in the other arm, he carried me up the dock and onto a pale sand pathway through dark vegetation. For a short while, it was pitch black in the jungle-like growth, and then I could see a warm light ahead. It was about at the point when I realized the light was a house, the two bright, perfect squares were wide windows framing a front door, that the stage fright attacked again, more forcefully than before, worse than when I'd thought we were headed for a hotel. My heart thudded audibly against my ribs, and my breath seemed to get stuck in my throat. I felt Edward's eyes on my face, but I refused to meet his gaze. I stared straight ahead, seeing nothing. He didn't ask what I was thinking, which was out of character for him. I guessed that meant he was just as nervous as I suddenly was. He set the suitcases on the deep porch to open the doors. They were unlocked. Edward looked down at me, waiting until I met his gaze before he stepped through the threshold. He carried me through the house, both of us very quiet, flipping on lights as he went. My vague impression of the house was that it was quite large for a tiny island, and oddly familiar. I'd gotten used to the pale-on-pale colour scheme preferred by the Cullens. It felt like home. I couldn't focus on any specifics, though. The violent pulse beating behind my ears made everything a little blurry. Then Edward stopped and turned on the last light. The room was big and white, and the far wall was mostly glass, standard decor for my vampires. Outside, the moon was bright on white sand, and just a few yards away from the house, glistening waves. But I barely noted that part. I was more focused on the absolutely huge white bed in the center of the room, hung with billowy clouds of mosquito netting. Edward set me on my feet. "I'll go get the luggage." The room was too warm, stuffier than the tropical night outside. A bead of sweat dewed up on the nape of my neck. I walked slowly forward until I could reach out and touch the foamy netting. For some reason, I felt the need to make sure everything was real. I didn't hear Edward return. Suddenly, his wintry finger caressed the back of my neck, wiping away the drop of perspiration. "It's a little hot here," he said apologetically. "I thought that would be best." "Thorough," I murmured under my breath, and he chuckled. It was a nervous sound, rare for Edward. "I tried to think of everything that would make this easier," he admitted. I swallowed, loudly, still facing away from him. Had there ever been a honeymoon like this before? I knew the answer to that. No, there had not. "I was wondering," Edward said slowly, "if first, maybe you'd like to take a midnight swim with me." He took a deep breath, and his voice was more at ease when he spoke again. "The water will be very warm. This is the kind of beach you approve of." "Sounds nice," my voice broke. "I'm sure you'd like a human minute or two." It was a long journey. I nodded woodenly. I felt barely human. Maybe a few minutes alone would help. His lips brushed against my throat, just below my ear. He chuckled once, and his cool breath tickled my overheated skin. "Don't take too long, Mrs. Cullen." I jumped a little at the sound of my new name. His lips brushed down my neck to the tip of my shoulder. "I'll wait for you in the water." He walked past me to the French door that opened right onto the beach sand. On the way, he shrugged out of his shirt, dropping it on the floor, and then slipped through the door into the moonlit night. The sultry, salty air swirled into the room behind him. Did my skin burst into flames? I had to look down to check. Nope, nothing was burning, at least not visibly. I reminded myself to breathe, and then I stumbled toward the giant suitcase that Edward had opened on top of a low white dresser. It must be mine because my familiar bag of toiletries was right on top, and there was a lot of pink in there, but I didn't recognize even one article of clothing. As I poured through the neatly folded piles, looking for something familiar and comfortable, a pair of old sweats maybe, It came to my attention that there was an awful lot of sheer lace and skimpy satin in my hands. Lingerie. Very lingerie-ish lingerie with French tags. I didn't know how or when, but someday Alice was going to pay for this. Giving up, I went to the bathroom and peeked out through the long windows that opened to the same beach as the French doors. I couldn't see him. I guess he was there in the water, not bothering to come up for air. In the sky above, the moon was lopsided, almost full, and the sand was bright white under its shine. A small movement caught my eye, draped over a bend in one of the palm trees that fringed the beach. The rest of his clothes were swaying in the light breeze. A rush of heat flashed across my skin again. I took a couple of deep breaths and then went to the mirrors above the long stretch of counters. I looked exactly like I'd been sleeping on a plane all day. I found my brush and yanked it harshly through the snarls on the back of my neck until they were smoothed out and the bristles were full of hair. I brushed my teeth meticulously twice. Then I washed my face and splashed water on the back of my neck, which was feeling feverish. That felt so good that I washed my arms as well. And finally I decided to just give up and take the shower. I knew it was ridiculous to shower before swimming, but I needed to calm down, and hot water was one reliable way to do that. Also, shaving my legs again seemed like a pretty good idea. When I was done, I grabbed a huge white towel off the counter and wrapped it under my arms. Then I was faced with a dilemma I hadn't considered. What was I supposed to put on? Not a swimsuit, obviously, but it seemed silly to put my clothes back on, too. I didn't even want to think about the things Alice had packed for me. My breathing started to accelerate again and my hands trembled, so much for the calming effects of the shower. I started to feel a little dizzy. Apparently a full-scale panic attack on the way. I sat down on the cool tile floor in my big towel and put my head between my knees. I prayed he wouldn't decide to come look for me before I could pull myself together. I could imagine what he would think if he saw me going to pieces this way. It wouldn't be hard for him to convince himself we were making a mistake. And I wasn't freaking out because I thought we were making a mistake. Not at all. I was freaking out because I had no idea how to do this. And I was afraid to walk out of this room and face the unknown. Especially in French lingerie. I knew I wasn't ready for that yet. This felt exactly like having to walk out in front of a theatre full of thousands with no idea what my lines were. How did people do this? Swallow all their fears and trust someone else so implicitly with every imperfection and fear they had, with less than the absolute commitment Edward had given me. If it weren't Edward out there, if I didn't know, in every cell of my body that he loved me as much as I loved him, unconditionally and irrevocably and, to be honest, irrationally, I'd never be able to get up off this floor. But it was Edward out there, so I whispered the words, "Don't be a coward," under my breath, and scrambled to my feet. I hitched the towel tighter under my arms and marched determinedly from the bathroom. Past the suitcase full of lace and the big bed without looking at either, out the open glass door, onto the powder-fine sand. Everything was black and white, bleached colorless by the moon. I walked slowly across the warm powder, pausing beside the curved tree where he had left his clothes. I laid my hand against the rough bark and checked my breathing to make sure it was even enough. I looked across the low ripples black in the darkness, searching for him. He wasn't hard to find. He stood, his back to me, waist deep in the midnight water, staring up at the oval moon. The pallid light of the moon turned his skin a perfect white, like the sand, like the moon itself, and made his wet hair black as the ocean. He was motionless, his hands resting palms down against the water. The low waves broke around him as if he were a stone. I stared at the smooth lines of his back, his shoulders, his arms, his neck. The flawless shape of him. The fire was no longer a flash burn across my skin. It was slow and deep now. It smouldered away all my awkwardness, my shy uncertainty. I slipped the towel off without hesitation, leaving it on the tree with his clothes, and walked out into the white light. It made me pale as the snowy sand, too. I couldn't hear the sound of my footsteps as I walked to the water's edge, but I guessed that he could. Edward did not turn. I let the gentle swells break over my toes and found that he'd been right about the temperature. It was very warm, like bath water. I stepped in, walking carefully across the invisible ocean floor, but my care was unnecessary. The sand continued perfectly smooth, sloping gently toward Edward. I waded through the weightless current till I was at his side, and then I placed my hand lightly over his cool hand lying in the water. "Beautiful," I said, looking up at the moon too. "It's all right," he answered, unimpressed. He turned slowly to face me. Little waves rolled away from his movement and broke against my skin. His eyes looked silver in his ice-colored face. He twisted his hand up so that he could twine our fingers beneath the surface of the water. It was warm enough that his cool skin did not raise goosebumps on mine. "But I wouldn't use the word beautiful," he continued. "Not with you standing here in comparison." I half smiled, then raised my free hand. It didn't tremble now. I placed it over his heart. White on white, we matched for once. He shuddered the tiniest bit at my warm touch. His breath came rougher now. "I promised we would try," he whispered, suddenly tense. If I do something wrong, if I hurt you, you must tell me at once." I nodded solemnly, keeping my eyes on his. I took another step through the waves and leaned my head against his chest. "Don't be afraid," I murmured. "We belong together." I was abruptly overwhelmed by the truth of my own words. This moment was so perfect, so right. There was no way to doubt it. His arms wrapped around me, holding me against him summer and winter. It felt like every nerve ending in my body was a live wire. "Forever," he agreed, and then pulled us gently into deeper water. The sun, hot on the bare skin of my back, woke me in the morning. Late morning, maybe afternoon, I wasn't sure. Everything besides the time was clear, though. I knew exactly where I was. The bright room with the big white bed, brilliant sunlight streaming through the open doors. The clouds of netting would soften the shine. I didn't open my eyes. I was too happy to change anything, no matter how small. The only sounds were the waves outside, our breathing, my heartbeat. I was comfortable, even with the baking sun. His cool skin was the perfect antidote to the heat. Lying across his wintry chest, his arms wound around me. It felt very easy and natural. I wondered idly what I'd been so panicky about last night. My fears all seemed silly now. His fingers softly trailed down the contours of my spine, and I knew that he knew I was awake. I kept my eyes shut and tightened my arms around his neck, holding myself closer to him. He didn't speak. His fingers moved up and down my back, barely touching it as he lightly traced patterns on my skin. I would have been happy to lie here forever, to never disturb this moment. But my body had other ideas. I laughed at my impatient stomach. It seemed sort of prosaic to be hungry after all that had passed last night, like being brought back down to earth from some great height. "What's funny?" he murmured, still stroking my back. The sound of his voice, serious and husky, brought with it a deluge of memories from the night, and I felt a blush color my face and neck. To answer his question, my stomach growled. I laughed again. "You just can't escape being human for very long." I waited, but he did not laugh with me. Slowly sinking through the many layers of bliss that clouded my head, came the realization of a different atmosphere outside my own glowing sphere of happiness. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the pale, almost silvery skin of his throat, the arc of his chin above my face. His jaw was taut. I propped myself up on my elbow so I could see his face. He was staring at the frothy canopy above us, and he didn't look at me as I studied his grey features. His expression was a shock. It sent a physical jolt through my body. "Edward," I said, a strange little catch in my throat. "What is it? What's wrong?" "You have to ask." His voice was hard, cynical. My first instinct, the product of a lifetime of insecurities, was to wonder what I had done wrong. I thought through everything that had happened, but I couldn't find any sour note in the memory. It had all been simpler than I'd expected. We had fit together like corresponding pieces made to match up. This had given me a secret satisfaction. We were compatible physically, as well as all the other ways. Fire and ice somehow existing together without destroying each other. More proof that I belonged with him. I couldn't think of any part that would make him look like this, so severe and cold. What had I missed? His finger smoothed the worried lines on my forehead. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. "You're upset. I don't understand, did I?" I couldn't finish. His eyes tightened. "How badly are you hurt, Bella? The truth. Don't try to downplay it." "Hurt?" I repeated. My voice came out higher than usual because the word took me so by surprise. He raised one eyebrow, his lips a tight line. I made a quick assessment, stretching my body automatically, tensing and flexing my muscles. There was stiffness and a lot of soreness too, it was true, but mostly there was the odd sensation that my bones all had become unhinged at the joints, and I had changed halfway into the consistency of a jellyfish. It was not an unpleasant feeling. And then I was a little angry, because he was darkening the most perfect of all mornings with his pessimistic assumptions. Why would you jump to that conclusion? I've never been better than I am now. His eyes closed. Stop that. Stop what? Stop acting like I'm not a monster for having agreed to this. Edward, I whispered, really upset now. He was pulling my bright memory through the darkness, staining it. Don't ever say that. He didn't open his eyes. It was like he didn't want to see me. Look at yourself, Bella. Then tell me I'm not a monster. Wounded, shocked, I followed his instruction unthinkingly, and then gasped. What had happened to me? I couldn't make sense of the fluffy white snow that clung to my skin. I shook my head and a cascade of white drifted out of my hair. I pinched one soft white bit between my fingers. It was a piece of down. Why am I covered in feathers? I asked, confused. He exhaled impatiently. I bit a pillow. Or two. That's not what I'm talking about. You bit a pillow? Why? Look, Bella. He almost growled. He took my hand very gingerly and stretched my arm out. Look at that. This time I saw what he meant. Under the dusting of feathers, large purplish bruises were beginning to blossom across the pale skin of my arm. My eyes followed the trail they made up to my shoulder and then down across my ribs. I pulled my hand free to poke at a discoloration on my left forearm, watching it fade, where I touched and then reappear. It throbbed a little. So lightly that he was barely touching me, Edward placed his hand against the bruises on my arm, one at a time, matching his long fingers to the patterns. Oh, I said. I tried to remember this, to remember pain, but I couldn't. I couldn't recall a moment when his hold had been too tight, his hands too hard against me. I only remembered wanting him to hold me tighter, and being pleased when he did. I'm so sorry, Bella, he whispered while I stared at the bruises. I knew better than this. I should not have. He made a low, revolted sound in the back of his throat. I am more sorry than I can tell you. He threw his arm over his face and became perfectly still. I sat for one long moment in total astonishment, trying to come to terms now that I understood it with his misery. It was so contrary to the way that I felt that it was difficult to process. The shock wore off slowly, leaving nothing in its absence. Emptiness. My mind was blank. I couldn't think of what to say. How could I explain it to him in the right way? How could I make him as happy as I was, or as I had been a moment ago? I touched his arm, and he didn't respond. I wrapped my fingers around his wrist and tried to pry his arm off his face, but I could have been yanking on a sculpture for all the good it did me. Edward. He didn't move. Edward? Nothing. So this would be a monologue then. I'm not sorry, Edward. I can't even tell you. I'm so happy. That doesn't cover it. Don't be angry. I'm really... Do not say the word fine. His voice was ice cold. If you value my sanity, Do not say that you are fine. But I am, I whispered. Bella, he almost moaned. Don't. No, you don't, Edward. He moved his arm. His gold eyes watched me warily. Don't ruin this. I am happy. I've already ruined this, he whispered. Cut it out, I snapped. I heard his teeth grind together. I groaned. Why can't you just read my mind already? It's so inconvenient to be a mental mute. His eyes widened a little bit, distracted in spite of himself. That's a new one. You love that I can't read your mind. Not today. He stared at me. Why? I threw my hands up in frustration, feeling an ache in my shoulder that I ignored. My palms fell back against his chest with a sharp smack. Because all this angst would be completely unnecessary if you could see how I feel right now. Or 5 minutes ago anyway, I was perfectly happy, totally and completely blissed out. Now, well, I'm sort of pissed actually. You should be angry at me. Well, I am. Does that make you feel better? He sighed. No. I don't think anything could make me feel better now. That, I snapped. That right there is why I'm angry. You are killing my buzz, Edward. He rolled his eyes and shook his head. I took a deep breath. I was feeling more of the soreness now, but it wasn't that bad. Sort of like the day after lifting weights. I'd done that with Renee during one of her fitness obsessions. 65 lunges with 10 pounds in each hand. I couldn't walk the next day. This was not as painful as that had been by half. I swallowed my irritation and tried to make my voice soothing. We knew this was going to be tricky. I thought that was assumed. And then, well, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. And this is really nothing. I brushed my fingers along my arm. I think for a first time, not knowing what to expect, we did amazing. With a little practice. His expression was suddenly so livid that I broke off mid-sentence. Assumed. Did you expect this, Bella? Were you anticipating that I would hurt you? Were you thinking it would be worse? Do you consider the experiment a success because you can walk away from it? No broken bones, that equals a victory. I waited, letting him get it all out. Then I waited some more while his breathing went back to normal. When his eyes were calm, I answered, speaking with slow precision. I didn't know what to expect, but I definitely did not expect how just wonderful and perfect it was. My voice dropped to a whisper. My eyes slipped from his face down to my hands. I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but it was like that for me. A cool finger pulled my chin back up. Is that what you're worried about? He said through his teeth. That I didn't enjoy myself. My eyes stayed down. I know it's not the same. You're not human. I just was trying to explain that for a human, well, I can't imagine that life gets any better than that. He was quiet for so long that finally I had to look up. His face was softer now, thoughtful. It seems that I have more to apologize for, he frowned. I didn't dream that you would construe the way I feel about what I did to you to mean that last night wasn't, well, the best night of my existence. But I don't want to think of it that way, not when you were. My lips curved up a little at the edges. Really? The best ever? I asked in a small voice. He took my face between his hands, still introspective. I spoke to Carlyle after you and I made our bargain, hoping he could help me. Of course, he warned me that this would be very dangerous for you. A shadow crossed his expression. He had faith in me, though. Faith I didn't deserve. I started to protest. He put 2 fingers over my lips before I could comment. I also asked him what I should expect. I didn't know what it would be for me, what with my being a vampire. He smiled half-heartedly. Carlyle told me it was a very powerful thing, like nothing else. He told me physical love was something I should not treat lightly. With our rarely changing temperaments, strong emotions can alter us in permanent ways. But he said I did not need to worry about that part. You had already altered me so completely. This time his smile was more genuine. I spoke to my brothers, too. They told me it was a very great pleasure, second only to drinking human blood. A line creased his brow. But I've tasted your blood, and there could be no blood more potent than that. I don't think they were wrong, really. Just that it was different for us. Something more. It was more, it was everything. That doesn't change the fact that it was wrong. Even if it were possible that you really did feel that way. What does that mean? Do you think I'm making this up? Why? To ease my guilt. I can't ignore the evidence, Bella. Or your history of trying to let me off the hook when I make mistakes. I grabbed his chin and leaned forward so that our faces were inches apart. You listen to me, Edward Cullen. I am not pretending anything for your sake, okay? I didn't even know there was a reason to make you feel better until you started being all miserable. I've never been so happy in all my life. I wasn't this happy when you decided you loved me more than you wanted to kill me, or the first morning I woke up and you were there waiting for me. Not when I heard your voice in the ballet studio. He flinched at the old memory of my close call with a hunting vampire, but I didn't pause. Or when you said I do. And I realized that somehow I get to keep you forever. Those are the happiest memories I have. And this is better than any of it. So just deal with it. He touched the frown line between my eyebrows. I'm making you unhappy now. I don't want to do that. Then don't you be unhappy. That's the only thing that's wrong here. His eyes tightened. Then he took a deep breath and nodded. You're right. The past is past, and I can't do anything to change it. There's no sense in letting my mood sour this time for you. I'll do whatever I can to make you happy now. I examined his face suspiciously, and he gave me a serene smile. Whatever makes me happy? My stomach growled at the same time that I asked. You're hungry, he said quickly. He was swiftly out of the bed, stirring up a cloud of feathers, which reminded me. So why exactly did you decide to ruin Esme's pillows? I asked. sitting up and shaking more down from my hair. He had already pulled on a pair of loose khaki pants, and he stood by the door rumpling his hair, dislodging a few feathers of his own. "I don't know if I decided to do anything last night," he muttered. "We're just lucky it was the pillows, and not you." He inhaled deeply, and then shook his head as if shaking off the dark thought. A very authentic-looking smile spread across his face, but I guessed it took a lot of work to put it there. I slid carefully off the high bed and stretched again, more aware now of the aches and sore spots. I heard him gasp. He turned away from me, and his hands balled up, knuckles white. "Do I look that hideous?" I asked, working to keep my tone light. His breath caught, but he didn't turn, probably to hide his expression from me. I walked to the bathroom to check for myself. I stared at my naked body in the full-length mirror behind the door. I'd definitely had worse. There was a faint shadow across one of my cheekbones. My lips were a little swollen. But other than that, my face was fine. The rest of me was decorated with patches of blue and purple. I concentrated on the bruises that would be hardest to hide. My arms and my shoulders. They weren't so bad. My skin marked up easily. By the time a bruise showed, I'd usually forgotten how I'd come by it. Of course, these were just developing. I'd look even worse tomorrow. That would not make things any easier. I looked at my hair then, and groaned. "Bella?" He was right there behind me as soon as I'd made a sound. "I'll never get all this out of my hair." I pointed to my head where it looked like a chicken was nesting. I started picking at the feathers. "You would be worried about your hair," he mumbled. But he came to stand behind me, pulling out the feathers much more quickly. "How did you keep from laughing at this? I look ridiculous." He didn't answer. He just kept plucking. And I knew the answer anyway. There was nothing that would be funny to him in this mood. "This isn't gonna work," I sighed after a minute. "It's all dried up. I'm gonna have to try to wash it out." I turned around, wrapping my arms around his cool waist. "Do you want to help me?" "I'd better find some food for you," he said in a quiet voice and gently unwound my arms. I sighed as he disappeared, moving too fast. It looked like my honeymoon was over. The thought put a big lump in my throat. When I was mostly feather-free and dressed in an unfamiliar white cotton dress that concealed the worst of the violet blotches, I padded off barefoot to where the smell of eggs and bacon and cheddar cheese was coming from. Edward stood in front of the stainless steel stove, sliding an omelette onto the light blue plate waiting on the counter. The scent of the food overwhelmed me. I felt like I could eat the plate and the frying pan too. My stomach snarled. "Here," he said. He turned with a smile on his face and set the plate on a small tiled table. I sat in one of the 2 metal chairs and started snarfing down the hot eggs. They burned my throat, but I didn't care. He sat down across from me. "I'm not feeding you often enough." I swallowed and then reminded him. "I was asleep?" This is really good, by the way. Impressive for someone who doesn't eat. "Food Network," he said, flashing my favorite crooked smile. I was happy to see it. Happy that he seemed more like his normal self. "Where did the eggs come from?" I asked the cleaning crew to stock the kitchen. A first for this place. I'll have to ask them to deal with the feathers. he trailed off, his gaze fixed on a space above my head. I didn't respond, trying to avoid saying anything that would upset him again. I ate everything, though he'd made enough for two. "Thank you," I told him. I leaned across the table to kiss him. He kissed me back automatically and then suddenly stiffened and leaned away. I gritted my teeth, and the question I meant to ask came out sounding like an accusation. "You aren't going to touch me again while you're here, are you?" He hesitated, then half smiled and raised his hand to stroke my cheek. His fingers lingered softly on my skin, and I couldn't help leaning my face into his palm. "You know, that's not what I meant." He sighed and dropped his hand. "I know. And you're right." He paused, lifting his chin slightly. And then he spoke again, with firm conviction. "I will not make love with you until you've been changed. I will never hurt you again." My entertainment became the number one priority on Isle Esme. We snorkeled. Well, I snorkeled, while he flaunted his ability to go without oxygen indefinitely. We explored the small jungle that ringed the rocky little peak. We visited the parrots that lived in the canopy on the south end of the island. We watched the sunset from the rocky western cove. We swam with the porpoises that played in the warm, shallow waters there. Or at least, I did. When Edward was in the water, the porpoises disappeared as if a shark was near. I knew what was going on. He was trying to keep me busy, distracted, so that I wouldn't continue badgering him about the sex thing. Whenever I tried to talk him into taking it easy with one of the million DVDs under the big screen plasma TV, he would lure me out of the house with magic words like coral reefs and submerged caves and sea turtles. We were going all day, so that I found myself completely famished and exhausted when the sun eventually set. I drooped over my plate after I finished dinner every night. Once I'd actually fallen asleep right at the table, and he'd had to carry me to bed. Part of it was that Edward always made too much for one, but I was so hungry after swimming and climbing all day that I ate most of it. Then, full and worn out, I could barely keep my eyes open. All part of the plan, no doubt. Exhaustion didn't help much with my attempts at persuasion, but I didn't give up. I tried reasoning, pleading, and grouching, all to no avail. I was usually unconscious before I could really press my case far. And then my dreams felt so real. Nightmares mostly, made more vivid, I guessed, by the too bright colors of the island. That I woke up tired, no matter how long I slept. About a week or so after we'd gotten to the island, I decided to try compromise. It had worked for us in the past. I was sleeping in the blue room now. The cleaning crew wasn't due till the next day, and so the white room still had a snowy blanket of down. The blue room was smaller, the bed more reasonably proportioned. The walls were dark, panelled in teak, and the fittings were all luxurious blue silk. I'd taken to wearing some of Alice's lingerie collection to sleep in at night, which weren't so revealing compared to the scanty bikinis she had packed for me when it came right down to it. I wondered if she'd seen a vision of why I would want such things, and then shuddered, embarrassed by that thought. I'd started out slow with innocent ivory satins, worried that revealing more of my skin would be the opposite of helpful, but ready to try anything. Edward seemed to notice nothing, as if I were wearing the same ratty old sweats I wore at home. The bruises were much better now, yellowing in some places and disappearing altogether in others. So tonight, I pulled out one of the scarier pieces as I got ready in the panelled bathroom. It was black, lacy, and embarrassing to look at even when it wasn't on. I was careful not to look in the mirror before I went back to the bedroom. I didn't want to lose my nerve. I had the satisfaction of watching his eyes pop open wide for just a second before he controlled his expression. "What do you think?" I asked, pirouetting so that he could see every angle. He cleared his throat. "You look beautiful. You always do." "Thanks," I said a bit sourly. I was too tired to resist climbing quickly into the soft bed. He put his arms around me and pulled me against his chest. But this was routine. It was too hot to sleep without his cool body close. "I'll make you a deal," I said sleepily. "I will not make any deals with you," he answered. "You haven't even heard what I'm offering." "It doesn't matter." I sighed. "Dang it. And I really wanted... Oh well." He rolled his eyes. I closed mine and let the bait sit there. I yawned. It took only a minute, not long enough for me to zonk out. "All right. What is it you want?" I gritted my teeth for a second, fighting a smile. If there was one thing he couldn't resist, it was an opportunity to give me something. "Well," I was thinking. I know that the whole Dartmouth thing was just supposed to be a cover story, but honestly, one semester of college probably wouldn't kill me, I said, echoing his words from long ago, when he'd tried to persuade me to put off becoming a vampire. Charlie would get a thrill out of Dartmouth stories, I bet. Sure, it might be embarrassing if I can't keep up with all the brainiacs still. 18, 19, it's really not such a big difference. It's not like I'm going to get crow's feet next year. He was silent for a long moment. Then in a low voice he said, "You would wait. You would stay human." I held my tongue, letting the offer sink in. "Why are you doing this to me?" he said through his teeth, his tone suddenly angry. "Isn't it hard enough without all of this?" He grabbed a handful of lace that was ruffled on my thigh. For a moment I thought he was going to rip it from the seam. Then his hand relaxed. "Doesn't matter. I won't make any deals with you. I want to go to college." "No, you don't. And there's nothing that's worth risking your life again, that's worth hurting you." "But I do want to go." "Well, it's not college as much as it's that I want to be human a little longer." He closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. "You are making me insane, Bella. Haven't we had this argument a million times, you always begging to be a vampire without delay?" "Yeah, but... well, I have a reason to be human that I didn't have before." "What's that?" "Guess," I said, and I dragged myself off the pillows to kiss him. He kissed me back, but not in a way that made me think I was winning. It was more like he was being careful not to hurt my feelings. He was completely, maddeningly, in control of himself. Gently, he pulled me away after a moment and cradled me against his chest. "You are so human, Bella, ruled by your hormones," he chuckled. "That's the whole point, Edward. I like this part of being human. I don't want to give it up yet. I don't want to wait through years of being a blood-crazed newborn for some part of this to come back to me. I yawned, and he smiled. You're tired. Sleep, love. He started humming the lullaby he'd composed for me when we first met. I wonder why I'm so tired, I muttered sarcastically. Couldn't be part of your scheme or anything. He just chuckled once and went back to humming. For as tired as I've been, you'd think I'd sleep better. The song broke off. You've been sleeping like the dead, Bella. You haven't said a word in your sleep since we got here. If it weren't for the snoring, I'd worry you were slipping into a coma. I ignored the snoring jibe. I didn't snore. I haven't been tossing. That's weird. Usually I'm all over the bed when I'm having nightmares and shouting. You've been having nightmares? Vivid ones. They make me so tired. I yawned. I can't believe I haven't been babbling about them all night. What are they about? Different things, but the same, because of the colors. Colors. It's also bright and real. Usually when I'm dreaming, I know that I am. With these, I don't know I'm asleep, but it makes them scarier. He sounded disturbed when he spoke again. What is frightening you? I shuddered slightly. Mostly, I hesitated. Mostly, he prompted. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't want to tell him about the child in my recurring nightmare. There was something private about that particular horror. So instead of giving him the full description, I gave him just one element. Certainly enough to frighten me or anyone else. The Volturi, I whispered. He hugged me tighter. They aren't going to bother us anymore. You'll be immortal soon, and they'll have no reason. I let him comfort me, feeling a little guilty that he'd misunderstood. The nightmares weren't like that exactly. It wasn't that I was afraid for myself, I was afraid for the boy. He wasn't the same boy as that first dream, the vampire child with the blood-red eyes who sat on a pile of dead people I loved. This boy I'd dreamed of 4 times in the last week was definitely human. His cheeks were flushed and his wide eyes were a soft green. But just like the other child, he shook with fear and desperation as the Volturi closed in on us. In this dream, that was both new and old, I simply had to protect the unknown child. There was no other option. At the same time, I knew I would fail. He saw the desolation on my face. What can I do to help? I shook it off. They're just dreams, Edward. Do you want me to sing to you? I'll sing all night if it will keep the bad dreams away. They're not all bad. Some are nice, so colourful, underwater, with the fish and the coral. It all seems like it's really happening. I don't know that I'm dreaming. Maybe this island's the problem. It's really bright here. Do you want to go home? No, not yet. Can't we stay a while longer? We can stay as long as you want, Bella, he promised me. When does this semester start? I wasn't paying attention before. He sighed. He may have started humming again too, but I was under before I could be sure. Later, when I awoke in the dark, it was with shock. The dream had been so very real, so vivid, so sensory. I gasped aloud now, disoriented by the dark room. Only a second ago it seemed I had been under the brilliant sun. Bella, Edward whispered, his arms tight around me, shaking me gently. Are you alright, sweetheart? Oh, I gasped again. Just a dream, not real. To my utter astonishment, tears overflowed from my eyes without warning, gushing down my face. "Bella," he said, louder, alarmed now. "What's wrong?" He wiped the tears from my hot cheeks with cold, frantic fingers, but others followed. "It was only a dream." I couldn't contain the low sob that broke in my voice. The senseless tears were disturbing, but I couldn't get control of the staggering grief that gripped me. I wanted so badly for the dream to be real. "It's okay, love. You're fine. I'm here." He rocked me back and forth, a little too fast to soothe. "Did you have another nightmare?" "It wasn't real. It wasn't real." "Not a nightmare?" I shook my head, scrubbing the back of my hand against my eyes. "It was a good dream." My voice broke again. "Then why are you crying?" he asked, bewildered. "Because I woke up," I wailed, wrapping my arms around his neck in a chokehold and sobbing into his throat. He laughed once at my logic, but the sound was tense with concern. "Everything's all right, Bella. Take deep breaths." "It was so real," I cried. "I wanted it to be real." "Tell me about it," he urged. "Maybe that'll help." "We were on the beach." I trailed off, pulling back to look with tear-filled eyes at his anxious angel's face, dim in the darkness. I stared at him, broodingly, as the unreasonable grief began to ebb. "And?" he finally prompted. I blinked the tears out of my eyes, torn. "Oh, Edward. Tell me, Bella," he pleaded, eyes wild with worry at the pain in my voice. But I couldn't. Instead, I clutched my arms around his neck again and locked my mouth with his feverishly. It wasn't desire at all. It was need, acute to the point of pain. His response was instant but quickly followed by his rebuff. He struggled with me, as gently as he could in his surprise, holding me away, grasping my shoulders. "No, Bella," he insisted, looking at me as if he was worried I'd lost my mind. My arms dropped, defeated, the bizarre tears spilling in a fresh torrent down my face, a new sob rising in my throat. He was right. I must be crazy. He stared at me with confused, anguished eyes. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. But he pulled me to him then, hugging me tightly to his marble chest. "I can't, Bella, I can't." His moan was agonized. "Please," I said, my plea muffled against his skin. "Please, Edward." I couldn't tell if he was moved by the tears trembling in my voice or if he was unprepared to deal with the suddenness of my attack, or if his need was simply as unbearable in that moment as my own. But whatever the reason, he pulled my lips back to his, surrendering with a groan, and we began where my dream had left off. I stayed very still when I woke up in the morning, and I tried to keep my breathing even. I was afraid to open my eyes. I was lying across Edward's chest, but he was very still, and his arms were not wrapped around me. That was a bad sign. I was afraid to admit I was awake and face his anger, no matter whom it was directed at today. Carefully, I peeked through my eyelashes. He was staring up at the dark ceiling, his arms behind his head. I pulled myself up on my elbows so that I could see his face better. It was smooth, expressionless. "How much trouble am I in?" I asked in a small voice. "Heaps," he said, but turned his head and smirked at me. I breathed a sigh of relief. "I am sorry," I said. "I didn't mean, well, I don't know exactly what was last night." I shook my head at the memory of the irrational tears, the crushing grief. "You never did tell me what your dream was about." "I guess I didn't. But I sorta showed you what it was about." I laughed nervously. "Oh," he said. His eyes widened and then he blinked. "Interesting." "It was a very good dream," I murmured. He didn't comment. A few seconds later I asked, "Am I forgiven?" "I'm thinking about it." I sat up, planning to examine myself. There didn't seem to be any feathers at least, but as I moved, an odd wave of vertigo hit. I swayed and fell back against the pillars. "Oh, head rush." His arms were around me then. "You slept for a long time. 12 hours. 12? How strange." I gave myself a quick once-over while I spoke, trying to be inconspicuous about it. I looked fine. The bruises on my arms were still a week old, yellowing. I stretched experimentally. I felt fine too. Well, better than fine, actually. "Is the inventory complete?" I nodded sheepishly. "The pillows all appear to have survived." "Unfortunately, I can't say the same for your nightgown." He nodded toward the foot of the bed, where several scraps of black lace were strewn across the silk sheets. "That's too bad. I liked that one." "I did too." "Were there any other casualties?" I asked timidly. "I'll have to buy Esme a new bed frame," he confessed, glancing over his shoulder. I followed his gaze and was shocked to see that large chunks of wood had apparently been gouged from the left side of the headboard. I frowned. "You'd think I would have heard that." "You seem to be extraordinarily unobservant when your attention is otherwise involved." "I was a bit absorbed," I admitted, blushing a deep red. He touched my burning cheek and sighed. "I'm really going to miss that." I stared at his face, searching for any signs of the anger or remorse I feared. He gazed back at me evenly, his expression calm but otherwise unreadable. "How are you feeling?" He laughed. "What?" I demanded. "You look so guilty, like you've committed a crime." "I feel guilty," I muttered. "So you seduced your all-too-willing husband. That's not a capital offense." He seemed to be teasing. My cheeks got hotter. "The word seduced implies a certain amount of premeditation." "Maybe that was the wrong word," he allowed. "You're not angry?" He smiled ruefully. "I'm not angry." "Why not?" "Well," he paused. "I didn't hurt you, for one thing." It was easier this time, to control myself, to channel the excesses. His eyes flickered to the damaged frame again. Maybe because I had a better idea of what to expect. A hopeful smile started to spread across my face. "I told you it was all about practice." He rolled his eyes. My stomach growled and he laughed. "Breakfast time for the human?" he asked. Please, I said, hopping out of bed. I moved too quickly, though, and had to stagger drunkenly to regain my balance. He caught me before I could stumble into the dresser. Are you all right? If I don't have a better sense of equilibrium in my next life, I'm demanding a refund. I cooked this morning, frying up some eggs, too hungry to do anything more elaborate. Impatient, I flipped them onto a plate after just a few minutes. Since when do you eat eggs sunny side up? He asked. Since now? Do you know how many eggs you've gotten through in the last week? He pulled the trash bin out from under the sink. It was full of empty blue cartons. Weird, I said after swallowing a scorching bite. This place is messing with my appetite. And my dreams, and my already dubious balance. But I like it here. We'll probably have to leave soon though, won't we, to make it to Dartmouth in time? Wow, I guess we need to find a place to live and stuff too. He sat down next to me. You can give up the college pretense now. You've gotten what you wanted, and we didn't agree to a deal, so there's no strings attached. I snorted. It wasn't a pretense, Edward. I don't spend my free time plotting like some people do. What can we do to wear Bella out today? I said in a poor impression of his voice. He laughed, unashamed. I really do want a little more time being human. I leaned over to run my hand across his bare chest. I have not had enough. He gave me a dubious look. For this, he asked, catching my hand as it moved down his stomach. Sex was the key all along. He rolled his eyes. Why didn't I think of that? He muttered sarcastically. I could have saved myself a lot of arguments. I laughed. Yeah, probably. You are so human, he said again. I know. A hint of a smile pulled at his lips. We're going to Dartmouth. Really? I'll probably fail out in one semester. I'll tutor you. The smile was wide now. You're going to love college. Do you think we can find an apartment this late? He grimaced, looking guilty. Well, we sort of already have a house there. You know, just in case. You bought a house? Real estate's a good investment. I raised one eyebrow and then let it go. So we're ready then. I'll have to see if you can keep your before car for a little longer. Yeah, heaven forbid I'm not protected from tanks. He grinned. How much longer can we stay? I asked. We're fine on time. A few more weeks if you want. And then we can visit Charlie before we go to New Hampshire. We could spend Christmas with Renee. His words painted a very happy, immediate future, one free of pain for everyone involved. The Jacob drawer, all but forgotten, rattled, and I amended the thought. For almost everyone. This wasn't getting any easier. Now that I'd discovered exactly how good being human could be, it was tempting to let my plans drift. 18 or 19, 19 or 20, did it really matter? I wouldn't change so much in a year, and being human with Edward. The choice got trickier every day. A few weeks, I agreed. And then, because there never seemed to be enough time, I added, so I was thinking, you know what I was saying about practice before? He laughed. Can you hold on to that thought? I hear a boat. The cleaning crew must be here. He wanted me to hold on to that thought. So did that mean he was not going to give me any more trouble about practicing? I smiled. Let me explain the mess in the White Room to Gustavo, and then we can go out. There's a place in the jungle on the south. I don't want to go out. I'm not hiking all over this island today. I want to stay here and watch a movie. He pursed his lips, trying not to laugh at my disgruntled tone. All right, whatever you'd like. Why don't you pick one out while I get the door? I didn't hear a knock. He cocked his head to the side, listening. A half-second later, a faint, timid rap on the door sounded. He grinned and turned for the hallway. I wandered over to the shelves under the big TV and started scanning through the titles. It was hard to decide where to begin. They had more DVDs than a rental store. I could hear Edward's low velvet voice as he came back down the hall, conversing fluidly in what I assumed was perfect Portuguese. Another, harsher human voice answered in the same tongue. Edward led them into the room, pointing toward the kitchen on his way. The two Brazilians looked incredibly short and dark next to him. One was a round man, the other a slight female, both their faces creased with lines. Edward gestured to me with a proud smile, and I heard my name mixed in with a flurry of unfamiliar words. I flushed a little as I thought of the downy mess in the white room, which they would soon encounter. The little man smiled at me politely. But the tiny coffee-skinned woman didn't smile. She stared at me with a mixture of shock, worry, and most of all wide-eyed fear. Before I could react, Edward motioned for them to follow him toward the chicken coop, and they were gone. When he reappeared, he was alone. He walked swiftly to my side and wrapped his arms around me. "What's with her?" I whispered, urgently, remembering her panicked expression. He shrugged, unperturbed. Corey's part Takuna Indian. She was raised to be more superstitious, or you could call it more aware than those who live in the modern world. She suspects what I am, or close enough. He still didn't sound worried. They have their own legends here. The Libby shaman, a blood-drinking demon who preys exclusively on beautiful women. He leered at me. Beautiful women only? Well, that was kind of flattering. She looked terrified, I said. She is, but mostly she's worried about you. Me? She's afraid of why I have you here, all alone. He chuckled darkly and then looked toward the wall of movies. Oh well, why don't you choose something for us to watch? That's an acceptably human thing to do. Yeah, I'm sure a movie will convince her you're human. I laughed and clasped my arms securely around his neck, stretching up on my tiptoes. He leaned down so that I could kiss him, and then his arms tightened around me, lifting me off the floor so that he didn't have to bend. Movie schmovie, I muttered as his lips moved down my throat, twisting my fingers in his bronze hair. Then I heard a gasp, and he put me down abruptly. Corey stood frozen in the hallway, feathers in her black hair, a large sack of more feathers in her arms, an expression of horror on her face. She stared at me, her eyes bugging out as I blushed and looked down. Then she recovered herself and murmured something that even in an unfamiliar language was clearly an apology. Edward smiled and answered in a friendly tone. She turned her dark eyes away and continued down the hall. She was thinking what I think she was thinking, wasn't she? I muttered. He laughed at my convoluted sentence. Yes. Here, I said, reaching out at random and grabbing a movie. Put this on so we can pretend to watch it. It was an old musical with smiling faces and fluffy dresses on the front. Very honeymoonish, Edward approved. While actors on the screen danced their way through a perky introduction song, I lolled on the sofa, snuggled into Edward's arms. Will we move back into the White Room now? I wondered idly. I don't know. I've already mangled the headboard in the other room beyond repair. Maybe if we limit the destruction to one area of the house, Esme might invite us back someday. I smiled, widely. So there will be more destruction? He laughed at my expression. I think it might be safer if it's premeditated, rather than if I wait for you to assault me again. It would only be a matter of time, I agreed casually, but my pulse was racing in my veins. Is there something the matter with your heart? Nope. Healthy as a horse. I paused. Did you want to go survey the demolition zone now? Maybe it would be more polite to wait until we're alone. You may not notice me tearing the furniture apart, but it would probably scare them. In truth, I had already forgotten the people in the other room. Right, drat. Gustavo and Cowrie moved quietly through the house, while I waited impatiently for them to finish and tried to pay attention to the happily ever after on the screen. I was starting to get sleepy, though according to Edward I'd slept half the day when a rough voice startled me. Edward sat up, keeping me cradled against him, and answered Gustavo in flowing Portuguese. Gustavo nodded and walked quietly towards the front door. They're finished, Edward told me. So that would mean we're alone now? How about lunch first, he suggested. I bit my lip, torn by the dilemma. I was pretty hungry. With a smile, he took my hand and led me to the kitchen. He knew my face so well it didn't matter that he couldn't read my mind. This is getting out of hand, I complained when I finally felt full. Do you want to swim with the dolphins this afternoon, burn off the calories? He asked. Maybe later. I had another idea for burning calories. And what was that? Well, there's an awful lot of headboard left. But I didn't finish. He'd already swept me up into his arms, and his lips silenced mine as he carried me, within human speed, to the blue room. The line of black advanced on me through the shroud-like mist. I could see their dark ruby eyes, glinting with desire, lusting for the kill. Their lips pulled back over their sharp, wet teeth, some to snarl, some to smile. I heard the child behind me whimper, but I couldn't turn to look at him. Though I was desperate to be sure that he was safe, I could not afford any lapse in focus now. They ghosted closer, their black robes billowing slightly with the movement. I saw their hands curl into bone-colored claws. They started to drift apart, angling to come at us from all sides. We were surrounded. We were going to die. And then, like a burst of light from a flash, the whole scene was different. Yet nothing changed. The Volturi still stalked toward us, poised to kill. All that really changed was how the picture looked to me. Suddenly, I was hungry for it. I wanted them to charge. The panic changed to bloodlust as I crouched forward, a smile on my face and a growl ripped through my bared teeth. I jolted upright, shocked out of the dream. The room was black. It was also steamy hot. Sweat matted my hair at the temples and rolled down my throat. I groped the warm sheets and found them empty. Edward? Just then, my fingers encountered something smooth and flat and stiff. One sheet of paper, folded in half. I took the note with me and felt my way across the room to the light switch. The outside of the note was addressed to Mrs. Cullen. I'm hoping you won't wake and notice my absence, but if you should, I'll be back very soon. I've just gone to the mainland to hunt. Go back to sleep, and I'll be here when you wake again. I love you. I sighed. We'd been here about 2 weeks now, so I should have been expecting that he would have to leave, but I hadn't been thinking about time. We seemed to exist outside of time here, just drifting along in a perfect state. I wiped the sweat off my forehead. I felt absolutely wide awake, though the clock on the dresser said it was after 1. I knew I would never be able to sleep as hot and sticky as I felt, not to mention the fact that if I shut off the light and closed my eyes, I was sure to see those prowling black figures in my head. I got up and wandered aimlessly through the dark house, flipping on lights. It felt so big and empty without Edward there. Different. I ended up in the kitchen and decided that maybe comfort food was what I needed. I poked around in the fridge until I found all the ingredients for fried chicken. The popping and sizzling of the chicken in the pan was a nice, homey sound. I felt less nervous while it filled the silence. It smelled so good that I started eating it right out of the pan, burning my tongue in the process. By the 5th or 6th bite, though, it had cooled enough for me to taste it. My chewing slowed. Was there something off about the flavor? I checked the meat, and it was white all the way through, but I wondered if it was completely done. I took another experimental bite. I chewed twice. Definitely bad. I jumped up to spit it into the sink. Suddenly the chicken and oil smell was revolting. I took the whole plate and shook it into the garbage, then opened the windows to chase away the scent. A coolish breeze had picked up outside. It felt good on my skin. I was abruptly exhausted, but I didn't want to go back to the hot room. I opened more windows in the TV room and lay on the couch right beneath them. I turned on the same movie we had watched the other day, and quickly fell asleep to the bright opening song. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was halfway up the sky, but it was not the light that woke me. Cool arms were around me, pulling me against him. At the same time, a sudden pain twisted in my stomach, almost like the aftershock of catching a punch in the gut. "I'm sorry," Edward was murmuring as he wiped a wintry hand across my clammy forehead. So much for thoroughness. I didn't think about how hot you would be with me gone. I'll have an air conditioner installed before I leave again. I couldn't concentrate on what he was saying. "Excuse me," I gasped, struggling to get free of his arms. He dropped his hold automatically. "Bella?" I streaked for the bathroom with my hand clamped over my mouth. I felt so horrible that I didn't even care at first that he was with me while I crouched over the toilet and was violently sick. "Bella, what's wrong?" I couldn't answer yet. He held me anxiously, keeping my hair out of my face, waiting till I could breathe again. "Damn rancid chicken," I moaned. "Are you all right?" His voice was strained. "Fine," I panted. "It's just food poisoning. You don't need to see this. Go away." "Not likely, Bella." "Go away," I moaned again, struggling to get up, so I could rinse my mouth out. He helped me gently, ignoring the weak shoves I aimed at him. After my mouth was clean, he carried me to the bed and sat me down carefully, supporting me with his arms. "Food poisoning?" "Yeah," I croaked. "I made some chicken last night. It tasted off, so I threw it out, but I ate a few bites first. He put a cold hand on my forehead. It felt nice. How do you feel now? I thought about that for a moment. The nausea had passed as suddenly as it had come, and I felt like I did any other morning. Pretty normal. A little hungry, actually. He made me wait an hour and keep down a big glass of water before he fried me some eggs. I felt perfectly normal, just a little tired from being up in the middle of the night. He put on CNN. We'd been so out of touch, World War III could have broken out, we wouldn't have known. And I lounged drowsily across his lap. I got bored with the news and twisted around to kiss him. Just like this morning, a sharp pain hit my stomach when I moved. I lurched away from him, my hand tight over my mouth. I knew I'd never make it to the bathroom this time, so I ran to the kitchen sink. He held my hair again. Maybe we should go back to Rio. See a doctor? He suggested anxiously while I was rinsing my mouth afterward. I shook my head and edged toward the hallway. Doctors meant needles. I'll be fine right after I brush my teeth. When my mouth tasted better, I searched through my suitcase for the little first aid kit Alice had packed for me, full of human things like bandages and painkillers and my object now, Pepto-Bismol. Maybe I could settle my stomach and calm Edward down. But before I found the Pepto, I happened across something else that Alice had packed for me. I picked up the small blue box and stared at it in my hand for a long moment, forgetting everything else. Then I started counting in my head. Once, twice, again. The knock startled me. The little box fell back into the suitcase. "Are you well?" Edward asked through the door. "Did you get sick again?" "Yes and no," I said, but my voice sounded strangled. "Bella, can I please come in?" Worriedly now. "Okay." He came in and appraised my position, sitting cross-legged on the floor by the suitcase and my expression blank and staring. He sat next to me, his hand going to my forehead at once. "What's wrong?" "How many days has it been since the wedding?" I whispered. 17, he answered automatically. "Bella, what is it?" I was counting again. I held up a finger, cautioning him to wait, and mouthed the numbers to myself. I'd been wrong about the days before. We'd been here longer than I thought. I started over again. "Bella," he whispered urgently. "I'm losing my mind over here." I tried to swallow. It didn't work. So I reached into the suitcase and fumbled around until I found the little blue box of tampons again. I held them up, silently. He stared at me in confusion. "What? Are you trying to pass this illness off as PMS?" "No," I managed to choke out. "No, Edward, I'm trying to tell you that my period is 5 days late." His facial expression didn't change. It was like I hadn't spoken. "I don't think I have food poisoning," I added. He didn't respond. He had turned into a sculpture. "The dreams?" I mumbled to myself in a flat voice. "Sleeping so much? The crying? All that food? Oh. Edward's stare seemed glassy, as if he couldn't see me anymore. Reflexively, almost involuntarily, my hand dropped to my stomach. "Oh," I squeaked again. I lurched to my feet, slipping out of Edward's unmoving hands. I'd never changed out of the little silk shorts and camisole I'd worn to bed. I yanked the blue fabric out of the way and stared at my stomach. "Impossible," I whispered. I had absolutely no experience with pregnancy or babies or any part of that world, but I wasn't an idiot. I'd seen enough movies and TV shows to know that this wasn't how it worked. I was only 5 days late. If I was pregnant, my body wouldn't even have registered that fact. I would not have morning sickness. I would not have changed my eating or sleeping habits. And I most definitely would not have a small but defined bump sticking out between my hips. I twisted my torso back and forth, examining it from every angle, as if it would disappear in exactly the right light. I ran my fingers over the subtle bulge, surprised by how rock hard it felt under my skin. Impossible, I said again, because bulge or no bulge, period or no period, and there was definitely no period. I'd never been late a day in my life. There was no way I could be pregnant. The only person I'd ever had sex with was a vampire, for crying out loud. A vampire who was still frozen on the floor with no sign of ever moving again. So there had to be some other explanation. Something wrong with me, a strange South American disease with all the signs of pregnancy only accelerated. And then I remembered something. A morning of internet research that seemed a lifetime ago now. Sitting at the old desk in my room at Charlie's house with grey light glowing dully through the window. Staring at my ancient, wheezing computer, reading avidly through a website called Vampires A to Z. It had been less than 24 hours since Jacob Black, trying to entertain me with Quileute legends that he didn't believe in yet, had told me that Edward was a vampire. I had scanned anxiously through the first entries on the site, which was dedicated to vampire myths around the world. The Filipino Danag, the Hebrew Estri, the Romanian Varacolaci, the Italian Stragoni Benefici, a legend actually based on my new father-in-law's exploits with the Volturi, not that I'd known anything at the time. I'd paid less and less attention as the stories had grown more and more implausible. I only remembered vague bits of the later entries. They mostly seemed like excuses dreamed up to explain things like infant mortality rates and infidelity. No, honey, I'm not having an affair. That sexy woman you saw sneaking out of the house was an evil succubus. I'm lucky I escaped with my life. Of course, with what I knew now about Tanya and her sisters, I suspected that some of those excuses had been nothing but fact. There had been one for the ladies, too. How can you accuse me of cheating on you, just because you've come home from a 2-year sea voyage and I'm pregnant? It was the incubus. He hypnotized me with his mystical vampire powers. That had been part of the definition of the incubus, the ability to father children with his hapless prey. I shook my head, dazed, but I thought of Esme and especially Rosalie. Vampires couldn't have children. If it were possible, Rosalie would have found a way by now. The incubus myth was nothing but a fable. Except there was a difference. Of course, Rosalie could not conceive a child because she was frozen in the state in which she passed from human to inhuman, totally unchanging. And human women's bodies had to change to bear children. The constant change of a monthly cycle, for one thing, and then the bigger changes needed to accommodate a growing child. Rosalie's body couldn't change. But mine could. Mine did. I touched the bump on my stomach that had not been there yesterday. And human men, well, they pretty much stayed the same from puberty to death. I remembered a random bit of trivia gleaned from who knows where. Charlie Chaplin was in his 70s when he fathered his youngest child. Men had no such thing as childbearing years or cycles of fertility. Of course, how would anyone know if vampire men could father children when their partners were not able? What vampire on earth would have the restraint necessary to test the theory with a human woman, or the inclination? I could think of only one. Part of my head was sorting through fact and memory and speculation, while the other half, the part that controlled the ability to move even the smallest muscles, was stunned beyond the capacity for normal operations. I couldn't move my lips to speak, though I wanted to ask Edward to please explain to me what was going on. I needed to go back to where he sat, to touch him, but my body wouldn't follow instructions. I could only stare at my shocked eyes in the mirror, my fingers gingerly pressed against the swelling on my torso. And then, like in my vivid nightmare last night, the scene abruptly transformed. Everything I saw in the mirror looked completely different, though nothing actually was different. What happened to change everything was a soft little nudge bumped my hand from inside my body. In the same moment, Edward's phone rang, shrill and demanding. Neither of us moved. It rang again and again. I tried to tune it out while I pressed my fingers to my stomach, waiting. In the mirror, my expression was no longer bewildered. It was wondering now. I barely noticed when the strange, silent tears started streaming down my cheeks. The phone kept ringing. I wished Edward would answer it. I was having a moment, possibly the biggest of my life. Ring, ring, ring. Finally, the annoyance broke through everything else. I got down on my knees next to Edward. I found myself moving more carefully, 1,000 times more aware of the way each motion felt. I patted his pockets until I found the phone. I half expected him to thaw out and answer it himself, but he was perfectly still. I recognized the number, and I could easily guess why she was calling. "Hi, Alice," I said. My voice wasn't much better than before. I cleared my throat. "Bella? Bella, are you okay?" "Yeah, is Carlisle there?" "He is. What's the problem?" "I'm not 100% sure." "Is Edward alright?" she asked warily. She called Carlisle's name away from the phone and then demanded, "Why didn't he pick up the phone?" before I could answer the first question. "I'm not sure." "Bella, what's going on? I just saw..." "What did you see?" There was a silence. "Here's Carlisle," she finally said. It felt like ice water had been injected in my veins. If Alice had seen a vision of me with a green-eyed, angel-faced child in my arms, she would have answered me, wouldn't she? While I waited through the split second it took for Carlisle to speak, the vision I'd imagined for Alice danced behind my lids. A tiny, beautiful little baby, even more beautiful than the boy in my dream. A tiny Edward in my arms. Warmth shot through my veins, chasing the ice away. "Bella, it's Carlisle. What's going on?" I wasn't sure how to answer. Would he laugh at my conclusions? Tell me I was crazy? Was I just having another colourful dream? "I'm a little worried about Edward. Can vampires go into shock?" "Has he been harmed?" Carlisle's voice was suddenly urgent. No, I assured him. Just taken by surprise. I don't understand, Bella. I think that maybe I might be... I took a deep breath. Pregnant. As if to back me up, there was another tiny nudge in my abdomen. My hand flew to my stomach. After a long pause, Carlisle's medical training kicked in. "When was the first day of your last menstrual cycle?" 16 days before the wedding? I'd done the mental math thoroughly enough just before to be able to answer with certainty. "How do you feel?" "Weird," I told him, and my voice broke. Another trickle of tears dribbled down my cheeks. This is going to sound crazy. Look, I know it's way too early for any of this. Maybe I am crazy, but I'm having bizarre dreams and eating all the time and crying and throwing up, and I swear something moved inside me just now. Edward's head snapped up. I sighed in relief. Edward held his hand out for the phone, his face white and hard. I think Edward wants to talk to you. Put him on, Carlyle said in a strained voice. Not entirely sure that Edward could talk, I put the phone in his outstretched hand. He pressed it to his ear. Is it possible? He whispered. He listened for a long time, staring blankly at nothing. And Bella? He asked, his arm wrapped around me as he spoke, pulling me close into his side. He listened for what seemed like a long time and then said, Yes, I will. He pulled the phone away from his ear and pressed the end button. Right away, he dialed a new number. What did Carlyle say? I asked impatiently. Edward answered in a lifeless voice. He thinks you're pregnant. The words sent a warm shiver down my spine. The little nudger fluttered inside me. Who are you calling now? I asked as he put the phone back to his ear. The airport. We're going home. Edward was on the phone for more than an hour without a break. I guessed that he was arranging our flight home, but I couldn't be sure because he wasn't speaking English. It sounded like he was arguing. He spoke through his teeth a lot. While he argued, he packed. He whirled around the room like an angry tornado, leaving order rather than destruction in his path. He threw a set of my clothes on the bed without looking at them, so I assumed it was time for me to get dressed. He continued with his argument while I changed, gesturing with a sudden, agitated movement. When I could no longer bear the violent energy radiating out of him, I quietly left the room. His manic concentration made me sick to my stomach. Not like the morning sickness, just uncomfortable. I would wait somewhere else for his mood to pass. I couldn't talk to this icy, focused Edward who, honestly, frightened me a little. Once again I ended up in the kitchen. There was a bag of pretzels in the cupboard. I started chewing on them absently, staring out the window at the sand and rocks and trees and ocean, everything glittering in the sun. Someone nudged me. I know, I said. I don't want to go either. I stared out the window for a moment, but the nudger didn't respond. I don't understand, I whispered. What is wrong here? Surprising, absolutely. Astonishing even, but wrong, no. So why was Edward so furious? He was the one who had actually wished out loud for a shotgun wedding. I tried to reason through it. Maybe it wasn't so confusing that Edward wanted us to go home right away. He'd want Carlyle to check me out, make sure my assumption was right. Though there was absolutely no doubt in my head at this point. Probably they'd want to figure out why I was already so pregnant, with the bump and the nudging and all of that. That wasn't normal. Once I thought of this, I was sure I had it. He must be so worried about the baby. I hadn't gotten around to freaking out yet. My brain worked slower than his. It was still stuck marveling over the picture it had conjured up before. The tiny child with Edward's eyes green, as his had been when he was human, lying fair and beautiful in my arms. I hoped he would have Edward's face exactly, with no interference from mine. It was funny how abruptly and entirely necessary this vision had become. From that first little touch, the whole world had shifted. Where before there was just one thing I could not live without, now there were two. There was no division. My love was not split between them now. It wasn't like that. It was more like my heart had grown, swollen up to twice its size in that moment. All that extra space already filled. The increase was almost dizzying. I'd never really understood Rosalie's pain and resentment before. I'd never imagined myself a mother, never wanted that. It had been a piece of cake to promise Edward that I didn't care about giving up children for him, because I truly didn't. Children, in the abstract, had never appealed to me. They seemed to be loud creatures, often dripping some form of goo. I'd never had much to do with them. When I'd dreamed of Renee providing me with a brother, I'd always imagined an older brother, someone to take care of me, rather than the other way around. This child, Edward's child, was a whole different story. I wanted him, like I wanted air to breathe. Not a choice, a necessity. Maybe I just had a really bad imagination. Maybe that was why I'd been unable to imagine that I would like being married until after I already was. Unable to see that I would want a baby until after one was already coming. As I put my hand on my stomach, waiting for the next nudge, tears streaked down my cheeks again. Bella? I turned, made wary by the tone of his voice. It was too cold, too careful. His face matched his voice, empty and hard. And then he saw that I was crying. Bella. He crossed the room in a flash and put his hands on my face. Are you in pain? No. He pulled me against his chest. Don't be afraid. We'll be home in 16 hours. You'll be fine. Carlisle will be ready when we get there. We'll take care of this, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Take care of this? What do you mean? He leaned away and looked me in the eye. We're going to get that thing out before it can hurt any part of you. Don't be scared. I won't let it hurt you. That thing, I gasped. He looked sharply away from me toward the front door. Damn it, I forgot Gustavo was due today. I'll get rid of him and be right back. He darted out of the room. I clutched the counter for support. My knees were wobbly. Edward had just called my little nudger a thing. He said Carlisle would get it out. No, I whispered. I'd gotten it wrong before. He didn't care about the baby at all. He wanted to hurt him. The beautiful picture in my head shifted abruptly, changed into something dark. My pretty baby crying, my weak arms not enough to protect him. What could I do? Would I be able to reason with them? What if I couldn't? Did this explain Alice's strange silence on the phone? Is that what she had seen? Edward and Carlisle killing that pale, perfect child before he could live. No, I whispered again, my voice stronger. That could not be. I would not allow it. I heard Edward speaking Portuguese again, arguing again. His voice got closer, and I heard him grunt in exasperation. Then I heard another voice, low and timid. A woman's voice. He came into the kitchen ahead of her and went straight to me. He wiped the tears from my cheeks and murmured in my ear through the thin, hard line of his lips. She's insisting on leaving the food she brought. She made us dinner. If he had been less tense, less furious, I knew he would have rolled his eyes. It's an excuse. She wants to make sure I haven't killed you yet. His voice went ice cold at the end. Gore edged nervously around the corner with a covered dish in her hands. I wished I could speak Portuguese, or that my Spanish was less rudimentary, so I could try to thank this woman who had dared to anger a vampire just to check on me. Her eyes flickered between the two of us. saw her measuring the color in my face, the moisture in my eyes. Mumbling something I didn't understand, she put the dish on the counter. Edward snapped something at her. I'd never heard him be so impolite before. She turned to go, and the whirling motion of her long skirt wafted the smell of the food into my face. It was strong, onions and fish. I gagged and whirled for the sink. I felt Edward's hands on my forehead and heard his soothing murmur through the roaring in my ears. His hands disappeared for a second, and I heard the refrigerator slam shut. Mercifully, the smell disappeared with the sound, and Edward's hands were cooling my clammy face again. It was over quickly. I rinsed my mouth in the tap while he caressed the side of my face. There was a tentative little nudge in my womb. It's okay. We're okay, I thought toward the bump. Edward turned me around, pulling me into his arms. I rested my head on his shoulder, my hands instinctively folded over my stomach. I heard a little gasp and I looked up. The woman was still there, hesitating in the doorway with her hands half outstretched as if she had been looking for some way to help. Her eyes were locked on my hands, popping wide with shock. Her mouth hung open. Then Edward gasped too and suddenly turned to face the woman, pushing me slightly behind his body. His arm wrapped across my torso like he was holding me back. Suddenly, Corey was shouting at him, loudly, furiously, her unintelligible words flying across the room like knives. She raised her tiny fist in the air and took 2 steps forward, shaking it at him. Despite her ferocity, it was easy to see the terror in her eyes. Edward stepped toward her too, and I clutched at his arm, frightened for the woman. When he interrupted her tirade, his voice took me by surprise, especially considering how sharp he'd been with her when she wasn't screeching at him. It was low now. It was pleading. Not only that, but the sound was different, more guttural, the cadence off. I didn't think he was speaking Portuguese anymore. For a moment, the woman stared at him in wonder, and then her eyes narrowed as she barked out a long question in the same alien tongue. I watched as his face grew sad and serious, and he nodded once. She took a quick step back and crossed herself. He reached out to her, gesturing toward me and then resting his hand against my cheek. She replied, angrily again, waving her hands accusingly toward him, and then gestured to him. When she finished, he pleaded again, with the same low, urgent voice. Her expression changed. She stared at him, with doubt plain on her face as he spoke, her eyes repeatedly flashing to my confused face. He stopped speaking, and she seemed to be deliberating something. She looked back and forth between the two of us, and then, unconsciously it seemed, took a step forward. She made a motion with her hands, miming a shape like a balloon jutting out from her stomach. I started. Did her legends of the predatory blood drinker include this? Could she possibly know something about what was growing inside me? She walked a few steps forward deliberately this time and asked a few brief questions which he responded to tensely. Then he became the questioner. One quick query. She hesitated and then slowly shook her head. When he spoke again, his voice was so agonized that I looked up at him in shock. His face was drawn with pain. In answer, she walked slowly forward until she was close enough to lay her small hand on top of mine, over my stomach. She spoke one word in Portuguese. Morte, she sighed quietly. Then she turned, her shoulders bent as if the conversation had aged her, and left the room. I knew enough Spanish for that one. Edward was frozen again, staring after her with the tortured expression fixed on his face. A few moments later, I heard a boat's engine putter to life and fade into the distance. Edward did not move until I started for the bathroom. Then his hand caught my shoulder. "Where are you going?" His voice was a whisper of pain. "To brush my teeth again." Don't worry about what she said. It's nothing but legends. Old lies for the sake of entertainment. I didn't understand anything, I told him, though it wasn't entirely true. As if I could discount something because it was a legend. My life was circled by legend on every side. They were all true. "I packed your toothbrush. I'll get it for you." He walked ahead of me to the bedroom. "Are we leaving soon?" I called after him. "As soon as you're done." He waited for my toothbrush to repack it, pacing silently around the bedroom. I handed it to him when I was finished. "I'll get the bags into the boat." "Edward?" He turned back. "Yes." I hesitated, trying to think of some way to get a few seconds alone. "Could you pack some of the food, in case I get hungry again?" "Of course," he said, his eyes suddenly soft. "Don't worry about anything. We'll get to Carlisle in just a few hours, really. This will all be over soon." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He turned and left the room, one big suitcase in each hand. I whirled and scooped up the phone he had left on the counter. It was very unlike him to forget things. To forget that Gustavo was coming. To leave his phone lying here. He was so stressed he was barely himself. I flipped it open and scrolled through the pre-programmed numbers. I was glad he had the sound turned off, afraid he would catch me. Would he be at the boat now? Or back already? Would he hear me from the kitchen if I whispered? I found the number I wanted. One I had never called before in my life. I pressed the send button and crossed my fingers. "Hello?" The voice, like golden wind chimes, answered. "Rosalie?" I whispered. "It's Bella. Please. You have to help me." Thank you for listening. That's where we close the book tonight on this episode of Down to Sleep, and on Breaking Dawn. Until next time, if you want to hear the next part right now, you can hear the entire saga and the entire book of Breaking Dawn read by me on the Patreon at patreon.com/downtosleep. Check out the Down to Sleep shop at downtosleeppodcast.com for meditations, affirmations, and a vampire boyfriend roleplay from me to help you sleep. And make sure you like and subscribe for more free readings right here. Until next time, thank you, and good night.